Lord, thank you for bringing us together safely this morning. Thank you for allowing us this time to spend together, to focus on your word. We ask you to guide us with your spirit and lead us to what you'd have us take out of the scripture that we'll be looking at today. We ask you that you continue to guide our lives, not just on one day of the week, but every day. And we ask for your continued blessings and patience. We ask that in your name. Amen. All right. So if we remember last week, we finished Judges chapter 6, and the end of chapter 6 was Gideon laying out the fleeces. And remember, he set out the fleece not to find out what God's instructions were, because he already had those. He already knew what that was. He set out the fleece to test God, to see if, he says, if you truly will save me the way that you said, then do these things to the fleece. So it was a matter of him testing the Lord to make sure that, I guess, that he understood what he was supposed to, that he understood that the Lord would deliver him through the battle, although it was made clear to him before that, that God said he was going to do those things. So we talked a little bit about laying out the fleece, and that moves us into Judges chapter 7, and we'll start at verse 1. And it says, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. Now, remember why his name got changed to that? His name was only Gideon until the Lord told him to destroy the altars, to Baal. And when he did, then his name was, I wouldn't say not changed too. He was just given another name, Jerubbaal or Jerubbaal. And that was his more of a Canaanite name, but it was the meaning of it is he who contends against Baal, because remember the city wanted to kill him for tearing down the altar, and Gideon's father said, if Baal is a god, have him defend himself, have him fight Gideon, and that fight never took place because Baal is a false god and Gideon's working for the true God. So that's the name change. So verse 1, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And Yahweh said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands, lest Israel honor themselves, saying, my own hand has saved me. So do we understand what that's saying? That's saying the army that has shown up to support Gideon was quite a decent army. It was nowhere near the size of the Midianite army, who we measured out to be around 135,000 soldiers. The ones that had joined Gideon, if I remember, were right around 32,000. So 32,000 against 135,000. And God tells Gideon, it's too many. So we see what he's trying to do there. Now, can 32,000 soldiers defeat 135,000? They can. It's just going to be very hard. But surely if they did, they would think that they were the best soldiers that had ever been born, right? If 32,000 men defeat 135,000, they will come out of it thinking we are awesome, right? So that is why the Lord is saying this is too many men, because A, he's already promised the victory. It's going to happen. And B, when it does happen, he doesn't need these people thinking that they did it, right? It's going to happen because he is going to make it happen, not because they are some super soldiers, right? So that's the point he's trying to push across. This is going to be a miracle delivered by Yahweh. So verse 3 says, so now come, call out in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead. So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. So that's how we get our total starting army for Gideon at 32,000, because 22,000 were afraid and left, and 10,000 stayed. Two things to say about this. The first thing is, obviously 32,000 against 135,000, the soldiers are going to be afraid. So it does make sense. We don't hold that against them, the 22,000 that returned. The only thing we could say, it may show a lack of faith, but it's unclear whether or not Gideon had told them that the Lord was going to win this battle. It was just people that had joined him. They were scared. They left. So it leaves him 10,000 remaining. Okay. Verse 4. Then Yahweh said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And it will be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, he will go with you. But everyone whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. Which makes sense, right? If God says, bring that one, you bring that one. If God says, don't bring that one, you don't bring that one. So that makes sense up to there. Verse 5. So he brought the people down to the water, and Yahweh said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set him aside by himself. And so also everyone who kneels to drink. So now we have two different ways to drink the water. Okay. And Gideon is to separate the soldiers by whoever laps it like a dog or whoever kneels. So he's making two groups out of these people. Verse 6. Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled to drink water. And Yahweh said to Gideon, I will save you with the 300 men who lapped, and I will give the Midianites into your hands. So let all the other people go, each man to his place. Okay, so let's stop there. This army for Gideon starts off at 32,000 against 135,000. God says it's too many. 22,000 leave because they're scared. So now it is 10,000 against 135,000. God says that's too many. Can you imagine the pride from an army of 10,000 that defeats 135,000, right? Every soldier saying, I was able to defeat, 13 and a half people by myself. Every soldier, one man at a time, all the way through. And God says, no, that we're not going to do it that way. Because again, pride. And these people will think they are the best soldiers ever made. So out of that 10,000, God says 9,700 of you who drink water normal, go home. 300 that drink water like a dog, that's who I'm going to use. So there's two reasons why he uses this group. One, because it's only 300 now against 135,000. And I think our chances are pretty much zero of winning that without a miracle. Surely anybody that would win that fight would acknowledge that it would be a miracle. Our second thing is how does the Bible describe dogs? It's not talking about dogs like canines, right? It's talking about them drinking like dogs, but it's comparing these men to dogs, right? The lowest of society are called dogs, right? Or maybe a pagan foreigner would be called a dog. So the Lord is going to use these 300 guys that drink like dogs, these 300 worthless men, and this is his army that he's going to fight against Midian with. And it should be obvious why, because 300 to defeat this giant army, this army that's big enough that it has oppressed the entire country of Israel, the whole nation, the one that had Gideon threshing out wheat in a wine press that they were so scared of, right? Those people are going to get defeated by 300 dog water drinking worthless men, okay? Surely we can acknowledge that that would be a miracle. And that comes down to making them outnumbered roughly 450 to 1. So every man would then need to be responsible for 450 men of the opposing military. It's not possible, right? So, moving on, verse 8 says, so the 300 men took the people's provisions and their trumpets into their hands. Okay. And Gideon sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent, but retained the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Okay, so in verse 8, Gideon is getting his 300 men together to go into battle, and they gathered their swords, their shields, their chariots. Nope. The 300 men, they took provisions and their trumpets. You know that you are fighting a battle that has been given to God when you go in without a sword and a shield and a chariot, no clubs. They went in with trumpets. Okay. Now they're not going to use these trumpets to hit people. So there's a certain amount of faith involved in 300 against 135,000, and their weaponry is trumpets. Verse 9. Now it happened the same night that Yahweh said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands. This is another example of our already not yet that we've talked about throughout all scripture so far. God has already given it into your hands. He says it right there. But the fight hasn't started yet, right? But it's already decided. It's already not yet. Verse 10. But if you are afraid to go down, and surely who wouldn't be? Again, 450-1, right? But if you are afraid to go down, then both you and Purah, your young man, some translations might say servant or something to that. So Purah would be Gideon's friend, bondservant, a worker for him. So the Lord is saying for Gideon and Purah to go down to the camp. They're not talking about the Israelite camp. They're talking about the Midianite camp. Verse 11, and you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened that you may go down against the camp. So he went with Purah, his young man, down to the outskirts of the armed men that were in the camp. Okay, so what God is saying is, if you're scared, then take your buddy and go down to the camp. What? Why? Verse 11, and you will hear what they say. Okay, so if he's scared, he's supposed to go into the Midianite camp and listen to something that's going to be said. And whatever it is, afterwards, your hands will be strengthened. Okay, so whatever it is going to encourage Gideon, right? What does God know that Gideon is going to hear if he goes to the Midianite camp? Verse 12. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, right? So they are spread out as far as you can see, this army that they need to attack, right? Verse 13, then Gideon came, and behold, a man was recounting a dream to his friend. And he said, behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent and struck it so that it fell and turned it upside down so that the tent lay flat. Okay. So we understand this dream, what it means. This giant, this vast army, as far as the eye can see, all right, this soldier in that army had a dream that a loaf of bread blew into that camp and destroyed the whole camp. Who is the bread of life? What's bread represent? What's bread? Who's the bread of life? Jesus is the bread of life, all right? Now, if a loaf of bread is going to come destroy this whole camp, this man has seen a vision, okay? So that the tent lay flat. Verse 14, and his friend answered and said, so now we see that a Midianite is interpreting another Midianite's dream that was given them by Yahweh. Yahweh gave the one soldier the dream, he gave the other soldier the interpretation, and he told Gideon to go down and witness it. Verse 14, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. A Midianite soldier had a dream that another Midianite soldier interpreted that let them both know this defeat was coming because Gideon's on his way, and it's not Gideon. The Lord has given this battle to him. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. Words of a Midianite soldier. Okay? Even the enemy knows that the Lord has given the battle to Gideon. So do you think that Gideon was encouraged by overhearing this conversation? Yep. He said, yeah, he might have been thinking, how do I take 300 guys and destroy all of this? And then he hears how from their own mouth. Good stuff. Verse 15. Now it happened that when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. Gideon's off to a good start. Then he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for Yahweh has given the camp of Midian into your hands. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. So if his army wasn't already small enough, the 300 against 135,000, he split the 300 into 3 companies. So now he has 3 little legions of 100 men each to attack. He doesn't seem worried about it, though, does he? He doesn't seem a little bit stressed. Not right now. So he divided the men into 300, or I'm sorry, he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. Again, they had no weapons. If you thought maybe they just had the trumpets and maybe they were carrying the swords in the other hands, nope, it was a pitcher. And you're thinking a Kool-Aid pitcher, and you're pretty much right. Right? This is going to be a clay pot that they would use to put, it says, over the torches. This is a, try to stay with me. This is an awesome story. So he put trumpets and empty pitchers. So the pitchers weren't full of water. They weren't full of wine. They weren't provisions. They were empty pitchers. One hand a trumpet, the other hand a pitcher. Okay. And it says torches inside the pitchers. Now, what are we doing with that? Why a torch inside the pitcher? Not food, not drink, a torch. Why? Okay. All for a reason. Verse 17. Then he said to them, look at me and do likewise. And behold, I will come to the outskirts of the camp, and it will be that just as I do so, you do likewise. He's not saying what it is yet. He's just saying, what I do, you do. When I do, you do. Okay? Verse 18, and I and all who are with me will blow the trumpet. Then you also shall blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, for Yahweh and for Gideon. Okay, so they have trumpets, they have pitchers, and they have torches for the pitchers. He is, as we'll find out, at the risk of ruining what is a fantastic story, they are going to take that 300 men, split up into 3 groups. They're going to surround the Midianite camp, and it's going to look like an ambush. Let's figure out how the other stuff plays into it. Verse 19. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him. All right, so that's how we know that these 300 are broken into hundreds. We figured as much because it said 3 companies, but now we know 100. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. So we're talking about evening, okay? When they had just set up the watch, and they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. And they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing and calling out, a sword for Yahweh and for Gideon. Let's stop there. So now we know exactly, even down to the detail of what hand was holding what. So they have the trumpets in their right hands. They have the torches in their left hands. They have the pitchers over the torches for a couple reasons. The main one, they can't see the light. That, they can use it as a lamp light to get where they're going, but it's not going to make enough light for the other camp to see them coming. So they have their torches covered. Then when they get to the edge of the camp and Gideon starts the whole show, they start it by everybody takes their pitcher and throws it. Why? Because these clay pitchers that are being broken in every direction around this camp makes the army in the middle, makes the camp think they're being ambushed from everywhere. They have no idea it's only 300. All they hear is all of this stuff being shattered everywhere. Then, at the same time, because the pitchers are coming off, they then see all the torches come up at once, all the way around. They're surrounded. They're surrounded, and they hear stuff shattering all over the place. And now they're hearing war horns, these trumpets being blasted all the way around, right? They got trumpets, the big shofars, right? That awesome sound. They're hearing that they're surrounded. There's fire everywhere. There's stuff breaking. They don't know what it is. They're smashing sounds. It sounds like a huge army has completely surrounded the Midianites, and they're about to swarm on them. That's what it seems like. That's the ambush. Let's see, verse 21. And each stood in his place around the camp. Right? They didn't do these things and then charge. They did these things and stood. So each stood his place around the camp. Then all of the camp ran, and they made a loud shout and fled. These people are perturbed. Keep in mind, middle watch. These people are calling it a night. All these soldiers their day's done. They're calling it a night. And then all of a sudden, in the dark, there's torches, there's stuff shattering. They're hearing trumpets blasting everywhere. They look outside. There's fire here. There's fire there. There's torches there. How many different legions of soldiers are attacking us? So these guys get up and they're screaming and running. Verse 22. So they blew 300 trumpets, and Yahweh set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole camp. Gideon's army didn't attack. These aren't Gideon's swords. These are Midianite soldiers attacking each other. They're confused. There's chaos. It's the middle of the night. There's all these loud noises. Nobody knows what's going on. God is causing confusion so that these 300 don't have to fight. All the Midianites are going to kill each other. This is the confusion. Throughout the whole camp, it says, and the camp fled as far as Beth Shedah towards Zerahah, as far as the edge of Abel Meholah by Tabbath. Verse 23, and the men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. So if we remember also when Deborah and Barak were judging Israel, they also called for the help from a few of their neighboring tribes. Naphtali seems to get called in a lot. They seem to get called in every battle. So they must have had some soldiers looking for a battle. So they call in these other three tribes to chase the Midianites that are running to escape. Most of them are stuck in this chaotic camp, not realizing even who they're fighting or who they're defending against. They're swinging swords around, trying to just survive one person at a time. Nobody knows what's going on. It's a mass killing of each other. Some of them are scared and run, and that's when the other Israelite tribes come and chase. Verse 24, now Gideon had sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down to meet Midian and capture the waters before them, as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they captured the waters as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. Now, what's that mean to capture the waters? I think we should probably understand that to mean these people were trying to flee, and they wanted to get back over the Jordan to get away from the Israelites who were in the promised land. So when they're fleeing to go back over the Jordan to cross back into their own country, what they're setting up here is the men of Ephraim are sealing off that escape route. They can't cross the Jordan. They might get there, but the Ephraimites are there to defeat them at the water. And it says in verse 25, then they captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. Then they pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. So we see at least these two princes made it across. The Ephraimites caught them there, killed them, and brought the heads back to Gideon. In general, if there was I don't know if we would consider it a war. If there's a battle between rulers, the battle ends when one of the rulers is defeated. And that defeat is proven to the winning ruler, either by bringing the head of the defeated ruler or by bringing them alive and bound. It would not have mattered if they would have brought them alive back to Gideon. He was given instruction by the Lord that these Midianites were to be judged. So even if they would have brought them back alive to Gideon, he would have had a duty to kill them. So that happens across the Jordan. They bring the heads back to Gideon, back on the west side of the Jordan where the promised land is. And we say, okay, this is a decent battle. Good thing. It seems like everybody did what was right. The Israelites worked together. Gideon listened to the voice of the Lord. He's been given this victory. But how long will it take for evil to find its way back? It's not going to take long. So as we move into chapter 8, we're finding that Gideon started off. I don't know if cowardly may be a fitting word. He was threshing wheat in a wine press, right? So, but he started off humble, right? You've picked the weakest clan, the youngest man from the weakest clan in Israel, Gideon. That's what he called himself, right? I'm the youngest from the weakest clan. So he acknowledges that he's really nobody special. He's just a humble servant. He goes and he takes this great victory for the Lord, and it seems like everything's going good. And then we realize, hey, I know what book we're studying. Surely it's not going to continue. So we move into chapter 8. All right. So Judges chapter 8. And here's where we're really going to notice how double-minded Gideon was. He lived among a people that were double-minded. Keep in mind, he had to destroy an altar to Baal in his own father's house, and his own family, his own brothers, his own relation, the Israelites wanted to kill him for destroying this pagan altar. So we know that the people are double-minded. We can't forget that Gideon is still one of the people, and his double-mindedness shows up a lot going forward. He starts to become more and more like them instead of them becoming more and more like him. That's the same thing that we have to be aware of and address as we go out, in our lives, school, work, whatever it is. We are not to fit in with the other people. They can fit in with us just fine. Okay. We do not change our values to fit in with the culture. We want the culture to realize the problems with its values and move back to the Lord's values. So chapter 7 ended. The Ephraimites took the water, and by doing that, they were able to capture and kill the princes. And then chapter 8 picks up in verse 1. We just had this great victory. So here's our celebration. Let's give glory to God because we just had this great victory. Verse 1. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, Gideon, what is this thing you have done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian? And they strongly contended with him. So the first thing we see in chapter 8 is the Ephraimites they're upset that Gideon didn't call them sooner because they wanted to share in the glory of this battle. God picked who went. Remember, it was 300. It wasn't open enrollment. Okay, God picked who went. And this is why God picked who went, because he doesn't need these knuckleheads saying that Gideon did something to them by not letting them get the honor from this victory. They don't deserve the honor from the victory, right? God gets the honor from the victory. But we see that Gideon, this is kind of the start of him being a good politician. They wanted to share the glory. They contended against him. So Gideon says in verse 2 and 3, he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? So let's look at what that means, because that can be confusing. Gideon is saying, what have I done in comparison to you guys, you Ephraimites, right? He's saying, isn't the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? Let's start with the harvest. Abiezer would be the clan that Gideon was from. These were where the 300 came from. So the harvest of Abiezer was the 300 that defeated the soldiers, or that caused the confusion that allowed for the Midianite defeat. Okay, that was the harvest of Abiezer. They defeated the majority of the army there, or the Lord did, using them as tools. But he says, so before that, it says the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim. The gleaning of the grapes, that's Ephraim getting the honor of killing the princes, right? What he's saying is there's much more honor for you guys having defeated the two princes than there was for us having defeated the entire rest of the army. Right? Do you understand that? So Gideon is trying to placate them. He's trying to make them feel better. You guys got the better honor anyways. Right? And then in verse 3, God has given the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you? Then their anger toward him subsided when he spoke this word. Right? How can you argue against that? Yeah. God gave you guys the honor part. You got the princes, you know? So he placates them with that. They did get that privilege. But Gideon, even while this conversation is this takes place pretty much mid-battle. Like, they did just kill the princes, but the battle's not complete yet. There are still some Midianites out there. So they're having this argument before they're all even defeated. Verse 4. It says, Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over. So keep in mind, they're coming from the west. They're going east, crossing the Jordan out of the promised land into more the Arab areas. But also keep in mind that we had 2.5 tribes settle there, right? Was it Reuben, Dan, and the half tribe of Manasseh? I think that was it, the 2.5 that settled on the other side. Okay, so he is technically leaving the promised land, but he's not leaving the Israelite territory. Okay, so he crossed the Jordan, wary yet pursuing. Verse 5, and he said to the men of Succoth, Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. Okay, so we saw that the two princes have already been captured and killed. And now he's chasing the kings. Okay, and he comes across this other Israelite city, Succoth, and he says, Let my guys get some bread. We're chasing these kings. We're going to defeat them. My army is hungry. They need bread. Verse 6, but the princes or the leaders or the rulers, the elders of Succoth said, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands that we should give bread to your army? Do we understand what that's saying? He's saying, have they already been defeated that we should feed you? We don't know who's going to win this fight. So why should we feed you? Because if you lose, those kings are going to kill us for helping you, right? So now Gideon has a different issue. He only brought provisions for the one night. Remember, they brought provisions in their trumpets. So he brought the provisions for the one night, the night of the battle. So as he chases the kings across the Jordan, the men are getting hungry. They go into Sukkoth, a city in an Israelite-controlled territory, with Israelites occupying it, and they would not help by giving his army food. So why would they think that 300 men could defeat the army that they're chasing? Right? Now, keep in mind, most of that army is already gone, but these guys might not know that, but they do know that the kings are still out there. They have some amount of army with them. And then they look at Gideon's 300 dog water lapping worthless men, and they say, there's no way this guy's going to win this battle. We're not going to help the loser of this war because the winner is then going to come kill us. Right? So it might not seem strange that they wouldn't help. So let's look deeper. Again, Sukkoth is not a foreign city. They did not ask foreigners for help. They asked other Israelites for help. It was in the territory of Gad. So Gad controlled the territory on that side. And we'll see that there's another city that's also located in that territory that Gideon's going to stop at. And if we remember the name Sukkoth, this is where Jacob wrestled with God. When Jacob had his encounter with the angel of the Lord that ends up being Yahweh, and they wrestle and his hip gets destroyed, that's here. That's at this place, right? This is a holy place to Israelites, but the people that live there won't even feed his army. We get the impression that they voted to not help Gideon, because it says that the princes of Sukkoth said, are the hands or the heads of Zeba and Zalmunna already in your hands? So it wasn't one person that said this. It was some sort of a council that voted on whether or not to help Gideon. And what they came to was, we're not going to help Gideon. And that will come back. We see in verse 7, it says, Gideon said this, thus when Yahweh has given Zeba and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. Now, I meant to put a picture up here of what these thorn bushes and briar bushes look like in these parts of the world. These are not the thorns that we get in Walpokenetta, Ohio. These are big, sharp, intimidating. These are thorns, okay? And that's what he's talking about thrashing them with. The thorns of the wilderness and with briars. So Gideon has just threatened a city full of Israelites for not helping him in this battle that the Lord has given victory. So we're not told whether or not Gideon was told to treat them in this way. It seems like Gideon went out on his own and made this threat, but we're not told one way or another. We can gather more of that story as the verses go on. It's going to kind of pile up. So verse 8 says, so he went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them. So he's asking them for bread also. And the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Sukkoth had answered him. Okay. Now, we already know that Sukkoth is where Jacob wrestled with God. Remember, Jacob, his name was changed. What was it changed to? Israel, right? So the Israelites are not honoring the place where Israel got his name. Okay. And now we go down to Penuel, which is also located in the region of Dan or Gad. And he's getting the same answer. Now, Penuel is where Jacob said this in Genesis 32:30. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been delivered. Now I understand the spelling from the E to the U. This is, in fact, the same place. So we have the place where Jacob wrestled with the Lord. The people that live there don't want anything to do with helping Gideon. And then we go to the place where Jacob named this because he saw the Lord face to face, and they don't want to help him either, right? Let's look at where that is. This is a hard to see picture. I understand that. But what we have, the Israelite territory, so the water there, we have our Jordan River. We have the Israelite territories off to the west, which is on the left-hand side. And then to the right, we see that line that crosses the Jordan. And that is the escape route of the Midianite kings when they left. They come out, they follow that escape route, and then they go south to Karkor. You see where they pass on the way there? They pass Sukkoth and Peniel on their way down to there. And that's where the Midianite kings are going to hide out. That is the territory of Gad. All right, so Peniel won't help him either, just like Sukkoth. Verse 9. So he, Gideon, spoke also to the men of Peniel, saying, when I return safely, I will tear down this tower. What tower? If we remember our study through Numbers, we might remember there's some concern with a few of the tribes that settled on the east side of the Jordan River. If we back up, the east side of the Jordan River is where the escape is happening to. It's where the territory of Gad is. It's where these cities, these Israelite cities that will not help Gideon are located. All of that is right there. So if we go forward to the book of Numbers and we remember our study there, it says, and they said, if we have, now they is the 2.5 tribes that did not want to cross. They said, if we have found favor in your sight, that's Moses they're talking to, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. Remember, the promised land is across the Jordan. These tribes wanted to settle here because they thought it was better than there. Do not take us across the Jordan. But Moses said to the sons of Gad and to the sons of Reuben, shall your brothers go to war while you yourselves sit here? So we see all these years ago, years and years and years and years ago, Moses' main concern with having the tribes not enter the promised land was they're not going to help their brothers when it's time for war. Now, that generation in Numbers, they did. Remember, they struck a deal with Moses. We'll build the city here. We'll leave our women, our children, and our livestock here. And then all of the men, all the fighting men, they cross the river and they help the rest of the territories fight. And then after that, they go back home. Okay. But years later, when their help is needed again, we don't know you, Oh, okay. Yeah. We're all Israelites, but why am I going to help you? We're different tribes. We live in different places. We kind of like the Midianites. They kind of have these gods that we enjoy worshiping. We kind of like their worship service. So Moses was already concerned about this all the way back in Numbers. And now it's coming to fruition. We go back to Judges, and we're reminding about tearing down the tower. And then he says, now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor. Remember, that was on our map. That was the southeasternmost city on that map that we looked at. So they were in Karkor, and their camps with them, about 15,000 men. And it says, all who were left of the entire camp of the sons of the east. For the fallen, or the soldiers that had already died, were 120,000 men who drew the sword. Now that's where we get our number for 135,000. 120,000 are already defeated. There are 15,000 left. So Gideon and his 300, and it does keep saying we're still at 300. Nobody was lost in the 300 against 120,000. No. Why? Because God fought that battle. Now the 300 are still chasing the 15,000 that are left, and those 15,000 stopped in Karkor. Now, verse 11 and 12, and Gideon went up by the way of those who dwelt in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and struck the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. Then Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw the whole camp into utter fright. Okay, so here's our camp again, or our map again. And we see Karkor on the southeast there. And we have that dark line, and that's the path that the kings of Midian and their 15,000 remaining troops, that's the path that they took to escape. But verse 11 says, Gideon went up by the way of those who dwelt in tents on the east of Nohab and Jogbehah, and struck the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. That red line is the path that Gideon took. So instead of following them down there to where they were camping, he went further east and came in from the other side of the camp. This is how they're unsuspecting. They think, hey, we're being chased. They're looking behind them. If somebody's chasing you, you look behind, right? But Gideon outsmarted them, thanks be to God. He went out and cut them off and came in from the other side. And that's how he was able to surprise them. And it says, threw the whole camp into utter fright. Now, why would the whole camp be scared? Just because he captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, threw the whole camp into utter fright. Probably because I imagine the people in that camp said, uh-oh, we didn't think he was going to win. He just did. What's he going to do to us now for harboring these kings that he was chasing, right? Seems like that follows. Verse 13, then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a youth from the men of Succoth and questioned him. So the youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. Right? So the battle's over. Gideon did finish off the battle at Karkor. They did capture the kings and defeated the rest of the army there. So there are no Midianites left to worry about, less the two kings who are captured. So Gideon's on his way back. So on his way back, he's going right past the cities that didn't help him, right? So when he's on his way there, he sees, it says this, he captured a youth from the men of Succoth and questioned him. He interrogated this kid. And that interrogation got him the 77 names of the elders that voted not to help him. So in verse 15, then he came to the men of Sukkoth, and he said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about who you reproached me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary? Then he took the elders of the city, as well as thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Sukkoth a lesson. And that's what we know about that. Now, we don't know if that lesson was a flogging. We don't know if that was if it went further than that. We're not really sure how, but we do know that Gideon taught them a lesson with those thorns that he told them he was going to use. We do not know if that was sanctioned by God or not. Verse 17, and he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Again, he kept his word. He did say he was going to come tear down this tower that was going to defend them. He did tear it down. And then he killed the men of the city. We don't know if that was sanctioned by God. We do know that that was an Israelite killing Israelites. This is something that hasn't happened in their history before. Why are Israelites killing Israelites? But through the book of Judges, now we get all these things that never happened before because they're so backslidden that everything inappropriate is happening, right? They're even killing each other. And that's going to, unfortunately, continue also. So Gideon makes good on his promises to both of these cities. Verse 18. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna. All right, so he has the two kings. He already judged these two cities, whether or not he was supposed to. He already did these two cities. So then his attention turns to the kings. Remember, he captured the kings. He did not kill the kings. So he turns his attention to them and he says, what kind of men were they who you killed at Tabor? So there was a battle at Tabor, or at least there was an incursion. There was something that led these kings to kill Israelites at Tabor. And the kings answered and said, they were like you, each one resembling the son of a king. And Gideon said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As Yahweh lives, if only you had let them live, I would not kill you. Okay, well, we have a few interesting things in that. It seems straightforward, except the end there, as Yahweh lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. Okay. God wanted them dead. So, either A, Gideon was about to be in direct opposition to God's will by not killing these kings, or God allowed them. Well, God allow anything that happens, God allows it. Whether or not, it doesn't mean it has to be something that he wants to happen for him to allow it to happen. You guys know that's right? Murders happen in the world. God doesn't want it to happen, but he does allow it. Okay. He allows people to make their own choices on whether or not to live righteously. Okay. So sometimes he can influence our choices by maybe seemingly removing the other option. So Gideon says if these men had not killed his brothers, he wouldn't have killed them. But they did kill his brothers, and God wanted those kings dead. So God allowed Gideon's brothers to be killed so that these kings would be killed. Now, whether or not he knew that Gideon wouldn't go through with it if his brothers were still alive, I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows that. But Gideon's own words witness against him that he was going to let these kings live if they let his brothers live. And we know that God was not going to allow these kings to live. We move on. Do we remember when we were studying in Moses, were the avenger of blood, after they were given the law? If somebody kills somebody, accidental or on purpose, there is an avenger of blood, right? And then if it's an accidental, they have the option of escaping to one of these sanctuary cities. Do we remember talking about that? The early prison system. The idea of the avenger of blood was not for revenge. It was for justice. So a family member of somebody that was killed would normally be picked to be the avenger of blood. They were allowed to kill the murderer without without any punishment, unless that person fled to a sanctuary city. If they ever left that city before the high priest died, or if they left for some other reason, if they were found outside that city, the avenger of blood could, without any form of, nothing could be brought against him. He was legally allowed to kill that murderer if that murderer came out of one of those sanctuary cities. Okay. So we do have a situation here where these men, these kings, have killed Gideon's brothers. So under Israelite law, we can use the avenger of blood in this situation. And it seems like that might be what Gideon's leaning towards here. So verse 20, it says, so he said to Jether, this is Gideon talking. He says to Jether, his firstborn, get up or rise and kill them. But the youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a youth. Okay. So we know a couple things about Jether. He was a youth, right? But youth describes a pretty wide age range in the Bible, right? A youth is pretty much anything from a toddler to a 30, 40-year-old. What's a youth, right? When Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac and Isaac went up, Isaac was a youth. But we know from other things that the youth of Isaac was late teens to mid 20s in that area, at some age and size where he could have easily overpowered Abraham and kept any of that from happening. But he submitted. There's a sign there. That's a type of Christ for sure. So we have that comparison, but we have a different situation here. We know that Jether is a youth. He's old enough to have a sword because he says he didn't draw it, but he's young enough to never have used it, which means he's certainly under 20, because 20, you are a soldier, you're in the battle, right? So what we would assume is that this kid is probably just into where they would consider the age of manhood. So probably about 13ish, right? Usually that's when you would have your Jewish ceremonies celebrating the transition from a youth towards adulthood. That's when you have your bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, right? So this youth is probably that age. He doesn't want to be involved in killing, but he does already have a sword. Okay. So Gideon's firstborn son, his oldest son, does not want to kill the kings. Why did Gideon even offer that as a choice? We have two reasons. I think both probably apply, but it could be either or both. Okay, so here's our thoughts. It would be a huge insult for a king to be killed by a youth. A huge insult. If we remember, there are multiple stories of what we would consider mighty men or rulers almost killed by youth or women even, and they flip out. Somebody else kill me quick. I don't want anybody saying that I was killed by fill in the blank. A child, a woman, anything, right? To not be killed in battle by a soldier that's a man is, it's insulting for this culture, right? So it could be argued that Gideon wanted, because these kings killed his brothers, he wanted that insult on them and on their posterity. He wanted them always to be remembered as the ones who were killed by a youth. Could be that. And I do think that that's probably part of it. There's another side of it. And by the way, the avenger of blood could be Gideon or his son, right? Gideon would have been normally the first choice because the avenger of blood would normally hold not an office. They would normally have a level of respect or honor equal to whoever was due to be killed. So the avenger of blood against a king would be some other ruler, another king or a judge or some other ruler, right? So it could be that Gideon also wanted to put this honor on his son that didn't know battle yet. He wanted him to be the one that killed the kings, not only to insult the kings, but as an honor. Like, my son is of equal rank as these kings are. His honor is the same as their honor, right? So it could be an elevation of his son and an insult to the kings. It seems like maybe he was going after both of these things. Regardless of any of that, these kings were doomed to die as soon as God said, go attack Midian. Okay, so it didn't matter. Gideon, his son, a rock from a watchtower. It did not matter how, but these kings were going to die as soon as the Lord spoke that. Verse 21. Then Ziba, so he just told his son to kill him. His son couldn't draw a sword. Okay, verse 21. Then Ziba and Zalmunna said, rise up yourself and smite us, for as the man, so is his might. So Gideon arose and killed Ziba and Zalmunna and took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. That is an interesting detail. If something's in there and it seems weird, it's in there for a reason. Why is it there? I did put some links both to the history of the crescent moon in the Arab areas and also the history of the crescent moon in Catholicism. Those are both going to be linked on here. So if you guys wanted to, you could look at that further. It's too much to get into right now. So we also find that that symbol, the crescent moon, combined with a cross, is used to depict, quote unquote, a Christian victory at Lepanto gained, quote, gained this victory gained by Mary's intercession, right? We both agree that these books are the word of God. We disagree that the extra ones are, okay? But if we both agree that these books are, then we should both agree anything in here is true, okay? So if we both agree everything in those books is true, we will turn to Hebrews. And it says, therefore let's figure out who he is. Therefore he is able to save forever those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So he is nobody except Christ, right? Christ is able to save forever those who draw near to God through him, Christ, since he, Christ, always lives to make intercession for them. So, were they given that victory by Mary's intercession? Well, it seems like there's only one that lives forever, and it is to make intercession. We continue. Romans, what does Paul say about this? And I believe that Paul wrote Hebrews, so I think that we're seeing what he said twice. But regardless of who wrote Hebrews, Paul did write Romans. Verse 26, chapter 8. And in the same way, the Spirit also helps our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we should. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. A, we will notice that Mary's not in here. B, we will notice these are all he and his. C, we know exactly who this is talking about. This is talking about Jesus Christ. So when it says, and this also puts the Trinity, wraps it all up in this nice little package, because it says, in the same way the Spirit helps with our weakness. Okay, we have the Spirit, for we did not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us. Okay, does the Spirit intercede or does Jesus intercede? The answer is yes. This is the Trinity. Christ himself, right? We're not talking about a group of separate people. The Spirit of God is the Spirit of Christ, and this is what makes intercession for us. We have all of that in Scripture, okay? Mary doesn't fit into intercession. We see that Jesus intercedes. We see that the Spirit intercedes. We know that God is one. Therefore, the Lord is interceding on our behalf. Now, let me do one more verse. 1 Timothy says there's one God, and how many mediators between God and man? Does Paul say there's one? There's one mediator? He doesn't say one and his mom. It doesn't say there's one and her name is. It says there's one God and one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus. When we get into one mediator, that mediator is Jesus. It's plain and clear. Mary does not intercede for anybody. Neither do any other saints. Only God in the flesh has the authority to intercede. All right. And Mary does not have that authority or ability. Okay. She cannot intercede. Only God in the flesh has the authority. He will not share his glory even with his earthly mother or any heretic wearing a funny hat saying that he's the representative of Christ on this earth. Anybody who claims the name of Christ is the representative of Christ on this earth. It is not a guy in a funny hat across the ocean. That's not the representative of Christ. The church is. And again, the church isn't a building holding a funny guy in a hat. The church is us. The church is the followers of Christ, right? So these are some of our big differences, right? The Bible clearly teaches that we are the church, that our bodies are the temple, that there is one mediator, right? These are just some of the spots where Catholicism has gone completely apostate. There's plenty of other ones, but I'm not going to try to bury that down, right? The laity are the people that are trying to truly follow Christ, and they're being confused by these false doctrines. That's what that is. So, speaking of heretics and idolatry, let's get back to Judges and finish up this chapter. Verse 22. Then the men of Israel, so this just happened. He just killed the kings. He took the ornaments. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. Yahweh shall rule over you. Okay, so this is the exact right answer, right? Gideon's saying the right things. That's it. Yes. We will notice that the Israelites, who some of which didn't even want to feed Gideon and his army, now want to make him king, right? They tell him, rule over us. So they want to make him king. Gideon does the correct thing and says, I'm not going to be the king. But we also see that they want to set up a monarchy and have the kingship run through Gideon's line. They want Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your son's son. So they want Gideon's whole family to carry the kingship now. We have a king now. Let's establish that. And then the whole line of kings will come from Gideon. Gideon says, no, I don't want that. God's your king. Serve him. It's so good. But then he kept talking. So verse 24. Yet Gideon said to them, I would make one request of you, that each of you give me an earring from his spoil. Remember, they just had this battle, so they were able to get all this loot, the victory, the spoils of war, they call it, right? So they all had these golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. Now, we don't know if they, being Ishmaelites, are the people that were defeated or the people that were mixed into the Israelite cities. Some of them were Ishmaelites, whoever them were. So he got gold earrings and a bunch of them. And they said, we will surely give them. So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil. And the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the neck bands that were on their camels' necks. Now, if we're thinking of a neck band, a necklace that a king would wear, this isn't one of them little rope necklace, right? This is a Mr. T starter kit. It's going to be, right? It's going to be big, a king's necklace. Now, however big that is, how big do you think the king's camel's necklace is going to be? Since their neck doesn't have to carry it, just the camel's neck. They're really going to weigh that one down, right? So it was 1,700 shekels without all of that. So they take all of this gold that were there, verse 27. Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in the city. Do we remember what an ephod is when we covered that? The ephod is the high priestly garment. He took all of this gold and turned it into a high priestly garment. Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city, Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. When it says Israel played the harlot with it there, it means they idolized it. So Gideon, who just won this battle, has already turned the country, the nation, back to idolatry through his own doing, because he wanted this gold from these kings so he can make himself a fancy outfit. Was Gideon a priest? Nope. Was he a king? Nope. Then why is he asking for spoils of war like a king would? And why is he using that spoil of war to make a priestly garment for himself? Right? I don't want to be king. I'm not a priest, but he wants everything that comes with it. So we see Gideon starting to change. Okay? It's a snare to Gideon and his household. The Israelites are back into idolatry, and they're not even, like, the battle hasn't even, the footsteps are still in the ground, right? The bodies are still around. It's amazing how fast they fell again. So he didn't want the spoils of war to be king, but he will go on to name one of his sons Abimelech, which translates to "my father is king." So, but he didn't want to be king, right? Gideon was stuck in a state of being double-minded. We need to be careful so we don't end up in that same state. He made for himself a golden ephod, the sacred vestment of the high priest. He wanted the honor. He wanted the honor that came with both positions. And we see that pride, it's taking control of him. And then our familiar enemy, idolatry, it's back from within the camp itself. And Gideon is the one responsible for bringing it back because of what he did. And then we finish out here, verse 28. So Midian was subdued or defeated before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore. That means they were in submission, right? Their heads remained bowed. They were in submission. And the land was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Okay. So they were given that. They're given another period of testing for 40 years. We already know how that's going to go because it had already told us that they're back to playing the harlot even during his time. But God still gave them 40 years. So verse 29, and we start to notice that these names are going to start, Gideon is going to start being not used, and Jerubbaal is going to start being more used, and then it's going to change completely to where the only one we hear is Jerubbaal, the one who contend against Baal, or let Baal contend against him. Verse 29, then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. So Gideon went home. Verse 30, now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. So again, Gideon doesn't want to be a king, right? But he sure is behaving like one. Who besides a king has 70 wives? Oh, I'm sorry. Who has 70 sons because of his many wives? I guess it doesn't say 70 wives. So it does say many wives. He definitely thought of himself that way. He had concubines in different cities. So it seems like maybe he wanted the honor of being king. He wanted the honor of being priest without the responsibility of being king or the responsibility of being priest. Maybe he acknowledged that God did not call him to do either one of those things, but he still wanted the honor from both. That's what it might seem like. So verse 31, and his concubine who was in Shechem. I'm sure we remember Shechem. We've been there a few different times. We're going back. His concubine who was in Shechem also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. And that is the one that translates to "my father is king." So we also notice that the concubine isn't who named him that. It's not like this happened without Gideon's approval. It says he named him Abimelech, not she. Gideon named him, right? This is not a case where she spoke out of turn and he didn't know what was going on. This was Gideon naming him this. That's another problem. Verse 32. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. We know from that verse right there that despite all of Gideon's problems and failures, And despite all of our problems and failures, God didn't turn his back on Gideon. It says, whenever it says somebody died at a good old age and was buried with their father, this is a good thing. If the Lord includes that, it's included as a good thing. You will never find a wicked person that is worded like that. Okay. So Gideon, we will see Gideon. Okay. Gideon was not lost. Verse 33. Then it happened as soon as Gideon was dead. It doesn't say 40 years later. It doesn't say next week. It says it happened as soon as Gideon was dead that the sons of Israel turned back and played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal Berith their god. So as soon as Gideon died, they said, finally, enough of that. Let's get back to serving Baal. And they made Baal Berith their god. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember Yahweh, their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. Nope. Why would they not remember that God? Why would they go back to serving this other one? It all comes down to the worship service. Something people still talk about to this day, the different styles of the worship services. And what we do know about these cultures, these Baal worship cultures, is that their worship services were very promiscuous. Their worship involved a lot of fornication and not a lot of clothing. So of course, that's why these people wanted to join into that. We can easily just turn our back on God, who has all of these rules that we don't want to follow, and we can follow this other God who claims to be God because we like his rules better. His rules got girls. So most of sinful man can be traced back to just a couple things. Pride is up there real high on the list, and so is lust. And I don't know that you can't get every other sin under the sun from those two. They can lead to just about anything. So they went back as soon as he died. They went back. They waited no time. They went back. They played the harlot. They did these things. Verse 35. Not only did they abandon God, not only did they go back to their other gods. Verse 35. Nor did they show loving kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel. So he died without respect, as much as he wanted all that honor. Yeah, I don't want to be king, but I'll name my kid my father's king. I don't want to be king, but I will take that spoil of war and all that gold from you. You know, I'm not a priest, but a golden ephod, that sure would look awful nice. I'm gonna hang it up in my city. That's my golden ephod. But it does say all the good he did for Israel, but they didn't remember it because of all the double-mindedness that he had. The people saw that, his children saw that, and they were led by that. So Gideon, and at that point, most of the judges, they start off good. They don't end that way. We were told that his actions directly led the nation back into idolatry. They played the harlot with his ephod. It points out that it happened as soon as Gideon was dead, and it starts a downward spiral. That's going to end with there will be somebody that claims to be king, and he will usurp. We'll learn that word. He will usurp the throne to make himself king. So the end of Gideon's life, we get a better idea what caused these issues. It seems mostly tied to pride. We can probably trace most of our own sins or shortcomings on pride, even if we don't acknowledge it. We could say it was pride that started the fall. Right? Thousands of years ago, it was pride when someone said, I can be like God. I can be God. I can do that. Right? That was pride that said, I can be God. And then what's that lead to? Did God really say? So that pride turns into doubt. Did God really say you'll die if you eat that? So we have Satan's pride. He plants that doubt in Eve, and now we get the snowball rolling, right? Starts off with Satan's pride. I can be like God, right? So I can be like God, and he deceives the woman. So one thing in closing to pay attention to this week, pay attention to any pride that we might have in our lives. We might say, well, I don't feel like I'm better than anybody, therefore I have no pride. That's not what I'm talking about. Although if you do have that, it should be obvious. I'm talking about the pride that makes you think my way's the right way instead of God's way's the right way.